What if the world you live in was stitched together by footprints no one remembers, but every empire bled to follow? Silk didn't just shimmer, it whispered. Spices didn't just flavor, they seduced kings and collapsed dynasties. Trade wasn't commerce. It was conspiracy, a web of shadows stretching from the tomb-riddled dunes of Arabia to the frost-bitten rivers the Vikings bled silver down. This wasn't trade. It was war, silent, patient, eternal. Caravans vanished without a trace. Whole cities erupted and disappeared like mirages. Maps lied. Roads shifted. Every route was a vein, and someone, something, was always watching the flow. Even now, satellites trace the skeletons of these ancient paths, but no one asks what still sleeps beneath them. Who paid the price for silk? Who vanished for cinnamon? Why did every great empire break at the crossroads of trade? You think you know history. You don't. You've seen the surface, the flags, the battles, the monuments. But this is the circuitry beneath the skin. Walk the old roads and you'll feel it. The weight, the pull, the strange sense that you've been here before, lured by something that remembers your face. This book is not a chronicle. It's a warning. Once you step onto these forgotten paths, you don't come back clean. The wind hits hard in Xi'an before sunrise. Cold, sharp, laced with something ancient. Not just dust, something older, something that waits. There are no tourists at this hour. Only silence, broken by the slow creak of an iron gate somewhere down the alley. A light flickers in a street lamp, trembling against the darkness, as if afraid to wake the dead. But the dead don't sleep here. Not in Xi'an. Beneath this soil, soaked in dynasty and blood, lies a silence so loud it roars. Stand still long enough, and you feel it. A hum. A pressure behind your ears. The weight of 1,000 eyes that once marched westward, never knowing if they'd return. Eyes that watched silk slip through fingers like whispers, vanishing into the unknown. This is the eastern gate of the world's oldest corridor of greed and glory. The starting point. The first breath of what would become the Silk Road. Xi'an wasn't always called that. Long ago, it was Chang'an, the heart of the Han dynasty. 138 BCE, Zhang Qian is summoned. A court full of anxious generals and shadowed advisors watches him kneel before Emperor Wu. His mission is simple in words, lethal in consequence. Find allies to the west. Defy the Xiongnu blockade. Open a path through fire and sand. It's not diplomacy, it's a sacrifice dressed in silk. They sent him with a handful of men. Most never came back. Captured, chained, kept for over a decade among the very enemy he was sent to outwit. When Zhang Qian finally returned to Chang'an, he didn't bring armies. He brought something far more dangerous. Knowledge. He had seen horses in Fergana with blood in their veins like lightning. He spoke of kingdoms beyond mountains, beyond deserts, places no Han official had dared speak of aloud. Rome was a whisper in the west, but it was real. Traders, markets, power. That whisper twisted itself into an obsession. Emperor Wu ordered silk to be woven not as fashion but as weapon, offered not as gift but as bait. Threads finer than hair, dyed in hues the steppe had never seen. It wasn't fabric. It was strategy. The road was no longer a dream. It had to be carved, ripped open through territory ruled by fear and ambush. Silk, the most delicate thing in the empire, and it would now cut across the world like a blade. It begins in Xi'an, through the wild goose pagoda, through gates now buried, past walls that once throbbed with the hooves of caravans marching toward oblivion. No one walked lightly. Every merchant packed his life into a single animal's load. Every step west was a prayer whispered into foreign winds. The terracotta army wasn't meant to be seen. They weren't for tourists or curiosity. They were soldiers forged in silence, frozen in rank, buried to protect an emperor who couldn't accept death. Qin Shi Huang built them before the Han rose, but they're still here, watching, guarding, their eyes carved with such focus, such cold readiness. It feels like they know something you don't. Each warrior carries a face that existed once. A man with fears, breath, thoughts. Now dust, but still standing. The silence inside that tomb is suffocating. You don't breathe in there. The air doesn't move. Time doesn't move. Outside, Xi'an thrives. Neon signs, skyscrapers, buses packed with bodies scrolling screens. But just beneath their feet, old roads twitch like nerves under new skin. You walk one street, and your shoes crushed the bones of messengers who died before writing was inked on paper. A child in the Muslim quarter bites into a fried flatbread, unaware he's living on land once soaked in Persian blood. A shopkeeper haggles over jade carved in a style unchanged since 200 BCE. You think this is modern? It isn't. It's a ghost dressed in new clothes. Every turn of this city is a fold in history's cloak. Turn it too fast, and it might cut you. Zhang Qian's footsteps are here, whether the concrete admits it or not. He wasn't just a diplomat. He was a human bridge across time. Through him, the Han bled into Central Asia. Through him, silk traveled like contraband, wrapped under robes, sewn into linings, traded for obsidian, for glass, for fear. Merchants followed, then spies, then monks, then soldiers. The road was born not of peace, but of desperation. No map marked it clearly. No walls protected it. Only the promise of profit and the certainty of risk. Raiders knew its turns better than the traders did. Bones of mules still bleach under the Taklamakan's sun. Names erased by time. Histories silenced in sandstorms. Yet it all began here. The gate of the Silk Road wasn't ceremonial. It was brutal. It wasn't a grand arch. It was a point of no return. Walk west from Xi'an, and you enter a world that consumes you. Step too far, and the silence of the desert writes your name in dust and forgets it by morning. The ancients didn't need GPS. They had memory. Oral routes passed like sacred code. Oasis to oasis. Blood to blood. Every stop held risk and promise, often in equal measure. They carried silk, yes, but also ideas, rumors, faiths, plagues. The road was alive. In Xi'an today, locals still say you can't dig too deep without finding bones. Not all of them were armor. Not all of them came back. So you stand at the edge of the city. The sun creeps up like a slow-breathing beast. And you ask yourself a question no one says aloud. What kind of desperation must push a man to walk into the unknown with nothing but cloth and hope? And then, like Zhang Qian once did, you step forward. Not because you're brave, because something behind you has already decided. The wind changed. It wasn't loud. It didn't howl. It shifted with the slow, final breath of something ancient, dying quietly beneath a sky so wide it felt like judgment. You could taste the difference in the air. Taste the warning. The caravan master froze mid-step. Sand slid off his boot with a whisper that felt far too loud. Every man behind him went still. No one said it out loud. They didn't need to. They were entering the Taklamakan. The name alone cracked the heart like ice. It meant what it said, in the old tongue. Go in, and you won't come out. No myths. No riddles. Just a truth sharp enough to bleed. The desert didn't kill out of malice. It killed because it forgot you ever lived. The Darim Basin spread before them like a trap with no bait. Flat. Endless. Beautiful in the way that only dead things are beautiful. Perfect, motionless, and watching. The sun was not warm. It was a weapon. Sand sparkled like shattered glass. And somewhere under it all, buried beneath centuries of silence, were bones. So many bones. Dunhuang had faded behind them hours ago. The Mogeo caves, carved into sandstone cliffs, still throbbed in the back of the mind. Saints. Demons. Avalokiteshvaras with 1,000 hands. Paintings that refused to die. Scrolls sealed into chambers as if the artists feared the world would forget everything. And they were right. 1900, Wang Yuanlu, a Taoist monk, stumbles on a bricked-up cave. Sealed with dust, guarded by time. Inside, tens of thousands of manuscripts. Sutras. Calendars. Contracts. Lost languages. One slip of cloth carried the world's oldest printed book. But even those treasures feared the Taklamakan. Everyone did. You didn't cross this desert. You offered yourself to it. And hoped. The route ran ragged along its edge. Never through the heart. That center was death in slow motion. Dunes that swallowed footsteps as they formed. Oasis towns clung to its border like survivors after a flood. Khotan. Kashgar. Naya. Meran. Names worn thin by centuries of grit. Cities that rose because of trade and died because of thirst. Khotan bled jade into China's veins. Pale green stones cut from riverbeds by hand. Blessed, cursed, carried eastward by silent men who never stopped watching the horizon. Buddhist monks came next. Preachers with scrolls and oilskin, chanting Pali verses while their lips cracked from windburn. They built temples in caves, not because it was holy, but because it was safe. Caves didn't move. Caves didn't vanish. And in the Taklamakan, everything else did. Kashgar stood further west, where the dust met the mountains and the language bent. A city that still breathed even after empires forgot its name. It had been Persian, Turkic, Chinese, Mongol, Russian. It had been a graveyard and a prize. At its core, it was neither. It was a watcher, its bazaars older than memory, its stones worn by coins no one minted anymore. Caravans gathered there like ghosts finding each other. Silk from Xi'an, spices from India, wool from the steppe. 1,000 accents, none of them soft. Deals cut in silver, blood, and salt. No one trusted anyone, and everyone smiled. But before Kashgar, before the promise of rest and water, you had to pass the dunes. Not just sand, but sand that moved. The wind sculpted monsters into the horizon. Hills rose and vanished within hours. Footsteps disappeared behind you as you took them. There were markers once. Dead trees lashed with red cloth. Stones with names chipped into them. Most were gone now. The sand had eaten them. Survival meant ritual. You rose before dawn, walked until your tongue swelled, rested at noon beneath patched tents that flapped like dying lungs. You never stopped moving water. From pouch to lips. From lips to skin. Every drop was sacred. Camels carried it like gold. When one collapsed, you didn't grieve. You cut open its stomach for moisture. The night brought no relief. Only cold. Brutal, sharp, punishing cold. The kind that made fire smoke black and brittle. You heard things at night. Not voices. Rhythms. Like hooves that never quite arrived. Bells with no owner. Whispers in a language your mind didn't know, but your bones remembered. They said old cities lay under the dunes. Real ones. Entire civilizations. Naya swallowed. Lulan cursed. Towers made of salt bricks. Palaces overgrown with dust. Archaeologists found coins there with Greek letters. Hair from mummies still curled in the desert air. Tattoos. Shoes. Almonds, perfectly preserved. Untouched since 200 BCE. Who were they? Traitors? Exiles? Kings who got too close to the edge? The wind never answered. It just shifted again. Always from the west. Always reminding. Even the maps feared this place. They showed the Taklamakan like an absence. A wound. A blank. But men still crossed it. Because of silk. Because of profit. Because someone promised that beyond it lay salvation. They packed prayer beads next to ledger books. They tied letters to their belts in case they didn't return. Some hired desert guides. Local men with quiet eyes who never spoke more than they needed to. Others trusted the stars, not knowing the sand could shift the horizon while they slept. Those who lived marked the route with stories. Not names. Not milestones. Stories. Of the man who followed a mirage for 3 days and found a well filled with salt. Of the girl who heard voices under the dunes and refused to walk further. She sat down, smiled, and never moved again. Of the entire caravan that vanished under a clear sky with no storm, no wind. Just gone. And always, always, the stories of hands reaching from the dunes, just as sleep took hold. The Silk Road passed through many lands, many terrors. Mountains, ice, bandits, war. But the Taklamakan was different. It didn't fight you. It didn't hate you. It simply waited. With patience that no living thing could match. Even now, step 1 foot off the track and you'll feel it. How quickly your presence begins to vanish. How the sound of your own breathing turns strange. As if you're no longer the one making it. As if something else has begun to breathe for you. And once that happens, you don't belong to the world anymore. You belong to the sand. The wind moved through Registan Square like it had business here. Not loud. Not playful. Just purposeful. Like it was checking on something. Or someone. The domes didn't move. The tiles didn't crack, but the shadows shifted, just a little, like they were listening. A man sat cross-legged on the cold stones, staring up at the madrasa walls. He hadn't blinked in a while. His lips moved, but there was no sound. He wasn't praying. He was remembering. You could feel it. Something was alive here. Something buried, not forgotten. The tiles on the facade, still drenched in lapis blue, still patterned with stars and calligraphy that didn't ask to be read. It all pulsed like a skin stretched over history's bones. The kind of beauty that hurts to look at for too long, because you know it came at a cost. Samarkand, once the heartbeat of Central Asia, now quiet, but not still. Never still. It was the Sogdians who shaped it first, centuries before the Mongols came screaming out of the steppe. Traders, linguists, interpreters for the world. When the Han Chinese needed guides westward, they chose Sogdians. When Indian monks carried scriptures, they passed through Sogdian hands. These people weren't just merchants. They were conductors. Cultures passed through them like electricity, and they stored every surge. Back then, Samarkand glowed without fire. A city of walls and gardens, towers and traders, all orbiting the pulse of commerce. Silk wasn't just sold here, it was transformed. It was rewoven with patterns from Persia, soaked in dyes from India, trimmed with gold from Byzantium. Every caravan that limped into the city left different than it arrived, heavier with goods, lighter with ignorance. And then came Timur. The heir in Samarkand still carries his name. Not as praise, not as curse, just certainty. In 1370, he took the city. Didn't ask, didn't negotiate. Tamerlane had no need for diplomacy when architecture could be his violence. He built not to inspire, but to conquer forever. Towers weren't symbols, they were warnings. Domes weren't made for prayer, they were declarations. He dragged artists, architects, scientists from every land he crushed. From Delhi, from Baghdad, from Shiraz. He stole brilliance and made it kneel. And then he built his Samarkand, a city so magnificent it looked like it was designed to offend the heavens. Look at the Ulugh Beg Madrasa. The height, the symmetry, the calligraphy that twists into mathematical exactness. Ulugh Beg, Timur's grandson, stood there, astronomer first, prince second, charting the stars with an observatory so precise it humbled Europe before they knew what astronomy meant. But even he couldn't stop the silence that followed. Today, a local historian named Bahram walks those courtyards barefoot. He says the stones remember. He points to a patch near the eastern gate. His father used to say blood pooled there when the city changed hands in 1500. Uzbek warlords. Persian reprisals. The Russians, centuries later. Empires shifted, borders tore, but that patch never dried quite right. Walk north and the road pulls toward Bokhara. Not a road, really. More like a scar. A stretch of earth worn smooth by centuries of hope and retreat. Caravans once crawled it like ants, carts creaking, camels coughing dust, guards eyeing the dunes with tired dread. Bandits didn't wait in the open. They waited in silence. But if Samarkand was a jewel, Bokhara was a trap. Not because it killed, because it held you. With voices, with scent, with stone. Its minarets don't whisper, they accuse. The Kulyan minaret, built in 1127, doesn't lean or shimmer. It watches. Genghis Khan spared it when he razed the rest of the city. He stood before it, and for the first time in years, said nothing. That silence saved it. Bokhara's labyrinthine alleys twist like veins. You walk left, and the air changes. Musk, copper, human. You walk right, and you lose the sun. The Liabai Haws, once a water source, now a stage for time itself. Men drink tea beside the pool, telling stories with too many gaps. Stories with teeth. In the 10th century, Bokhara was the capital of the Samanid Empire. A center of Islam so bright it made Baghdad look dim. Philosophers walked here with guards. Words were dangerous. Language was power. Persian returned from exile in these streets, reshaped, reborn, reloaded. The Samanid mausoleum still stands, brick laid over brick in patterns so tight, they look like waves frozen mid-motion. The dome hums if you press your ear to the wall. No one talks about that, but some still do it. Inside a small, half-broken caravanserai, now half-eaten by ivy and sunlight, an old woman weaves fabric by hand. Her fingers move like memory. No pattern, no sketch. She says the design comes in her sleep. That her great-grandmother's grandmother did the same. That somewhere in this cloth is a language no one has spoken in 500 years. Her grandson stands nearby, polishing carved wood panels. Each stroke of the cloth over walnut is tender, almost reverent. He says the script on the archway above them was once read by caliphs. Now, he says, people take selfies with it. A potter across the lane holds up a shard, green glaze, red clay, snapped centuries ago. He found it near the Ark of Bokhara, the ancient citadel. Says he heard something crack when he touched it. Not the clay, something underneath. At night, Bokhara tightens. Not in threat, in memory. Lamps swing in the wind, throwing shadows onto domes that once dictated fate. Some buildings lean, just slightly, as if burdened by too much remembering. Some alleyways feel colder than they should. Doors stay bolted, not from fear of people, but from something older. A sense that some thresholds were never meant to be crossed again. And in both cities, in Samarkand and in Bokhara, there's this quiet truth no one says aloud. The road never left. It just sank into the stone. It slipped into the silence between one market stall and the next. It curled into the paint of tiles that glow too bright in the dusk. It wrote itself into the rhythm of footsteps. You walk these streets, and the old path pulls at your spine. You don't feel it immediately, but hours later, something tugs. Something turns your head, and you realize you're not walking the past. It's walking you. The fire never flickers in Yazd. It burns behind glass, small and stubborn, its flame uninterrupted for over 1,000 years. You stand before it, held in silence. No chants, no bells, just the breathing of the priest beside you, steady as the desert wind outside. He watches the flame, not you. You could ask him what it means, but he wouldn't answer. Not because he doesn't know, because you should. This is not decoration. This is not tradition. This is Zoroastrian fire, tended by hands that remember empires the rest of the world has buried. It burned through the Parthians, through the Sassanids. It burned as Islam swept across the plateau. It burns now, quietly, beneath a steel sky and the growing hum of cars in modern Yazd. It is defiance, hidden in plain sight. Step outside, and the light blinds you. The desert bites your skin in thin, dry slashes. The mountains loom in the distance, jagged, ancient things that once shielded traders and armies and prophets. The road stretches west, winding through time more than land. You don't walk it, you're pulled by it. The royal road, once paved by the Achaemenids, reinforced by Parthian hooves, soaked in Sassanid blood. Kings didn't just rule from here, they moved from here. And movement meant power. Under the Parthians, it was arteries and nerves, linking east to west in one breathless, calculated system. Postal riders galloped from Susa to Ecbatana in 7 days flat. You can still feel them, in the wind that rushes too fast through the plains, in the space between trees where no birds land. This land doesn't speak. It remembers. Isfahan hits you like a hallucination. 1 second, you're in dust and shadow. The next, color, light, geometry so precise it hurts. You step into Nakshi Jahan Square, and your heart stutters. The scale is wrong. The beauty is too exact, too sharp. The blue tiles of the Shah Mosque shine like ice held up to flame. The arches don't stand. They float. You blink, and they're still there. Impossibly still. In the 1600s, Shah Abbas I made this city the center of the Safavid world. Not out of vanity, out of obsession. Trade had shifted. Ottomans to the west, Mughals to the east. So he carved a new path, built caravanserais like fortresses, paved roads, moved people like pawns. He made Isfahan the eye of an empire. Every wall here has heard secrets. Traders whispering in the shade. Scholars debating under the arches. Assassins waiting in the cool corridors behind the markets. The bazaar doesn't sleep. Even now, at night, the scent of saffron and sweat lingers in the stones. You walk past copper shops still echoing with the ring of hammers that haven't stopped since the 17th century. An old artisan wipes his brow with a sleeve stained in indigo. His tools are worn smooth. He doesn't look up, but he murmurs something, half Farsi, half memory. Everything passes, except what's made by hands. A boy with a tray of pomegranate juice steps past you. His shoes slap the stone. His smile is quick, but his eyes carry weight. You realize he was born here. He knows every corner, but the road still pulls at him. Always west, always forward, toward Tehran, the city that should not exist. No Silk Road brought you here. No ancient kingdom crowned it. It rose from nothing, but now it holds everything. Steel, glass, smog thick enough to taste. And yet, at the city's core, still, the pull of something ancient. Beneath the noise, the pressure of buried kings. The Golston Palace still stands in a pocket of quiet, its tiled walls defying the crush of traffic. Mirrors line its halls, each reflection cutting like truth. And north, in the mountains, shadows of Parthian fortresses cling to the cliffs. Abandoned, forgotten, but not empty. Hike far enough, and you'll find stones arranged with care. Old fire pits, the outline of a watchtower. You sit down on the edge, legs dangling into the gorge, and you feel it, the weight of 1,000 routes running through this land like veins. Zoroastrianism didn't vanish here. Islam didn't conquer here. They bled into each other, fought in silence, hid in alleys, argued in courtyards. The madrasas of Isfahan still echo with the footsteps of Avicenna, still warm with the breath of scholars who mapped the stars long before Europe looked up. You pass through Yazd again on your way east, and the wind is colder now. The fire temple is closed, but the scent of ash clings to your clothes. You rub your hands together and swear they still feel warm. The road is behind you, but it doesn't let go. You walk toward the next ruin, the next city, toward a silence you're not sure is holy or haunted. You feel watched, not by men, by memory, by the road itself. And somewhere beneath your feet, something waits. Something that remembers the Parthians, the Safavids, the Sassanids. Something that does not care who rules, only who walks, and who returns. The hoof struck stone, a single sound, sharp, cold, final, then another, then hundreds. They echoed through the past like an army of ghosts. The wind didn't howl, it shivered. Dust lifted from the canyon floor, stirred by a movement too ancient to name. Something was coming through Anatolia's spine, and it didn't care who watched. You stand just beyond the crumbling arches of a Seljuk caravanserai, your breath trapped in your throat. The sun is sinking fast. The sky over the Anatolian plateau bruises to purple, and the last of the light carves the mountains into fangs. Inside the stone compound, silence weighs everything down. You hear a chain sway in the wind, a creak from a gate that no longer opens. Something once moved here: goods, animals, soldiers, gold, stories. Now just shadow, stillness, but you swear you feel it. The weight of ancient commerce. The tension of travelers packed in tight beside strangers, counting coins by candlelight, sleeping with daggers tucked beneath their cloaks. This isn't nostalgia. This is residue. Built in the 13th century, these caravanserais weren't inns, they were fortresses. Secure, strategically spaced, firelit shelters from bandits, weather, betrayal. The Seljuks didn't build them for comfort. They built them to survive. And still, not everyone made it past. You walk through what remains of the main hall. The smell of animal sweat is long gone, but the grooves in the floor, worn down by camel trains, remain. One section of wall bears a carved inscription, Arabic script, weather-worn, hard to read, but it doesn't need translation. It's not meant for the living. The trade roads of Anatolia cut like nerves through a body that never died. From Kayseri to Konya, from Shivas to Aksaray, the Silk Road splintered into arteries, threading through plains and cliffs and mountain passes where snow kills without warning. Traders moved fast, guarded, cautious. One wrong step and the road buried you in white silence. One wrong handshake and your goods ended up in someone else's ledger. But still they came, east to west to east, again and again, because Constantinople was waiting. The name still burns. Even now, Istanbul, it can't hide what it once was. It stands like a scar between two continents. Europe to the left, Asia to the right, water slicing between like a blade held to the throat of history. The Bosporus churns black under moonlight. Ships pass in silence. No sails, no shouting, just shadows moving like secrets. You walk the city and time fractures. A Roman wall, cracked and sprawling. An Ottoman minaret leaning into dusk. Beneath your feet, the remnants of a Byzantine cistern, still cold, still wet, still echoing with footsteps that don't belong to you. The Hagia Sophia towers above, no longer cathedral, no longer mosque, something in between, something unfinished. In 330 CE, Constantine renamed the city Nova Roma, New Rome. It never needed the name. It was already eternal. For centuries, Constantinople was where every trade road snapped taut. Silk from China, spices from India, furs from the north, slaves from the steppe, all funneled into its ravenous heart. Byzantine merchants didn't just trade, they manipulated. Weighed silk like it was gunpowder, taxed it like it was gold. The state watched every deal. Surveillance dressed as bureaucracy, and everyone wanted in. By the 6th century, Emperor Justinian ordered monks to steal silkworm eggs from China. They smuggled them inside hollow canes, risking death by dismemberment. When they succeeded, the empire erupted. Constantinople didn't just control the trade, it manufactured it. Looms clicked like war drums. Silk adorned emperors and saints alike. The road no longer passed through Constantinople. It bowed to it. But the city never slept easy. In 1204, Latin crusaders sacked it, tore its churches, defiled its relics, carried back treasures that still sit in Venice like war trophies. The empire limped on for 2 centuries after that, but it was bleeding out. The Ottoman shadow crept closer. In 1453, it snapped shut. Mehmet II breached the Theodosian walls and changed the name. But not the weight. Even now, in Istanbul, the road pulses beneath your feet. In the Grand Bazaar, voices still bark deals in 5 languages. Silver, carpets, saffron, knockoff designer bags. A dizzying chaos. A performance. But behind the stalls, past the fake perfume and neon lights, there's something older. A cracked doorway. A hidden corridor. The air cools. The ground tilts. You enter a vault. No signs. No tourists. Just dust and stone. You touch the walls. Pitted, bruised, real. You hear nothing but your own breath, and even that sounds wrong. This is where the silk passed. The real silk. Threaded through hands that shook with exhaustion and hunger and fear. Every inch of this stone once mattered. Every corner held risk. Nothing was safe. A man with silver hair passes you, carrying a tray of tea. He doesn't speak, but his eyes say he's seen too much. He disappears into the shadows. Outside, Istanbul throbs with life. Horns, calls to prayer, the grind of metal on stone. But inside you now, something has shifted. You feel the road, not as geography, not as history, as pressure, the kind that never lifts, the kind that whispers to keep walking, that someone's always ahead, and something's always behind, the kind that won't let you rest, that won't let you go. And the only thing louder than the city's chaos is the silence of the road underneath. Always underneath. Waiting. The monsoon struck at midnight. Not with thunder. Not with warning. Just a sudden, violent breath of the sea that cracked the air and swallowed the coast whole. Palms bent backwards like they were begging. The sky opened its throat, and the rain came down in sheets. Thick, furious, endless. You couldn't see. You couldn't breathe. But beneath that storm, the docks still moved. Men carried sacks of black gold. Pepper, soaked now, but still worth more than silver. Their feet splashed through mud laced with blood and salt. Somewhere behind them, bronze lamps flickered in temple courtyards, and conch shells moaned like war cries through the trees. The Malabar coast wasn't sleeping. It never had. This was Maziris, 1st century CE, where the Indian Ocean curled its fingers around greed and faith and fire. The Romans had arrived. Not in legions, but in ships. Sleek, red-sailed, heavy with gold and wine. They brought coins stamped with emperors and left with spice packed so tight it seeped through the wood. The port smelled like sweat, pepper, fish, sandalwood, and fear. No signs marked it. No flags. But it was known, from Alexandria to Antioch. Roman merchants knew the name like a prayer, and they prayed before they reached it. The voyage wasn't easy. Death floated in every wave. But those who made it alive staggered off the ships in silence, stunned by the air. Thick, sweet, and charged, like something ancient was watching. Locals didn't flinch. This wasn't new. Ships had been coming for centuries. Yavnas, Arabs, Ethiopians. Now Romans. The Chera kings didn't care who you were, only what you paid, and how fast you left. Pepper grew inland, past the coconut groves, in the shadows of thick jungle where the soil stayed damp and the snakes were always close. It wasn't farmed. It was hunted, plucked before dawn, dried over slow fire, packed in palm leaf sacks and guarded like treasure. Because it was treasure, Romans called it Piper nigrum. Pliny the Elder hated that his empire bled gold for a spice. But they kept bleeding. Every grain carried empire on its skin. Jewish merchants came too, long before Rome. Long before Europe was anything more than cold tribes and superstition. They landed quietly, built homes near the river, prayed toward Jerusalem. Their script bent like waves. Their stones bore menorahs. They blended in, but never vanished. To this day, their tombs lie scattered through the backwaters, names carved in granite that still resist the rain. And then came the Syrians. Not with armies, with scripture. They walked inland, through the heat, past temples carved into hills, carrying crosses without nails. No blood, only light. The local kings listened. Some converted, or said they did. Churches rose near the coast, low buildings, tiled roofs, sandalwood beams darkened by incense and thyme. They didn't fight the old gods. They stood beside them. In Kerala, belief didn't conquer. It merged. The mosques came later. Arabic traders from the Hadramaut. Men with sharp eyes and quiet speech. They didn't shout their faith. They folded it into trade. Islam slid into the coast like a tide. Inevitable, silent, and permanent. The first mosques looked like temples. Whitewashed, with terracotta roofs and wooden minbars carved by Hindu artisans. No minarets. No dome. Just purpose. By the 7th century, this coast wasn't Indian anymore. It was everything. Spices didn't just move here. Civilizations did. And they stayed. In the kitchens, coconut and tamarind fused with chickpeas, beef, mustard seed. Roman amphorae have been found buried beside banana trees. Jewish cooks learned to crush pepper with dried mango. Syrian Christians baked bread that still carries the scent of Antioch. You taste it all in a single bite of mean curry. Kingfish simmered in clay pots, sharp enough to burn, soft enough to remember. And through it all, the monsoon returned. Every year, like a verdict. It dictated trade, life, death. You couldn't sail against it, only with it. Ships left Red Sea ports in July, rode the southwest winds straight to Malabar. They stayed until the northeast winds blew them home. 3 months. That was all. 3 months to trade, to love, to bribe, to betray, to steal, to worship. Then they were gone. The coast exhaled and waited, but the land never stopped moving. Behind the spice, the architecture changed. Wood gave way to tile. Courtyards widened. Roofs bent to foreign winds. Temples learned to curve like churches. And churches held the quiet of mosques. Everything in Kerala speaks 2 languages. Everything lives 2 lives. Even the houses. You walk through Kottapuram, where the Periyar River once carried Roman ships inland. The ruins of a fort rise like broken teeth from the mud. Portuguese cannon holes and laterite walls. But below that, older bricks. Indian, Roman, layered like lies. Dig too far, and the river itself starts whispering. Further south, you pass through Kollam. A man on the pier shows you a coin. Roman denarius. Found while digging his garden. He keeps it in a plastic pouch, as if afraid it might vanish. The emperor's face is worn smooth, but the wreath still holds. He asks if you want it. You say no, because something about it feels owned. The air smells of roasted cumin and fish oil. A boat creaks. Somewhere in the shadows, a Kathakali dancer practices, his green-painted face lit by flame, his movements sharp as knives. You realize you've seen his pose before. On a temple wall. On a Byzantine mosaic. Same shape. Same story. Different gods. The Malabar coast didn't belong to anyone. It consumed empires. And made them taste like rain. Like pepper. Like fire pressed into the tongue. You blink, and a new wave crashes. And just beneath the foam, something ancient waits. Not a ruin. Not a ghost. The road. Still wet. Still breathing. Still watching. The wind smelled like smoke and sweetness. Not fire. Not decay. Cinnamon. But not from a kitchen. From the trees, shaved, bled, stripped in coils by hands that didn't flinch. The scent wrapped around everything. The soil. The surf. The skin. In Sri Lanka, even the air had a price. A child stood barefoot at the edge of the jungle, watching a ship slide into Trincomalet's harbor. He didn't blink. Portuguese flags snapped in the wind, red and gold slashing the sky. The water glimmered with oil and hunger. No cannon fired. No drums. But the invasion had already begun. It always began like this, quiet, smiling, with open palms and hidden blades. You walk beneath the canopies now, past cinnamon trees still cut by hand, past temples older than the languages carved into their stone. Each shrine a whisper, each offering bowl a warning. The earth here speaks in incense and salt, in footsteps that vanish before sound. In the 1st century CE, sailors from Arabia called this island Serendib, the place where everything smelled of gods and trade. They didn't stumble here. They aimed for it. Cinnamon didn't grow in Yemen or Damascus or the Nile Delta. It grew here, in the mud-soaked southern forests, where rain fell sideways and the undergrowth hummed with things that watched but never moved. Arab dhows arrived centuries before the Europeans. They brought calligraphy, coin, and prayer. They didn't conquer. They nested, married locals, built mosques that bent toward Mecca but stood on Lankan stone. By the time Ibn Battuta arrived in the 14th century, the island's skin was already threaded with foreign breath. He called it sacred. He wasn't wrong. But no one left it alone. The Portuguese came in 1505. Not for war. Not yet. They wanted cinnamon. That's all. Or that's what they said. Cinnamon bark was worth more than gold. Light to carry, impossible to fake, and addictive to the palates of Europe's elite. The king of Cote smiled when they arrived. He offered trade. But the Portuguese did not understand equals. They built forts, converted shrines, held fire over priests, and asked for names. They moved like termites, chewing through stone and faith in silence. By 1597, they controlled the coasts. Not because they conquered, because they bled the island, inch by inch, deal by deal, until kings became pawns and monks became traitors. But Portugal was not eternal. The Dutch arrived in 1638, not to liberate, but to replace. The VOC didn't need churches. They needed order. Cinnamon had to flow, fast, constant, pure. They turned forests into grid lines. Plantation logic, measured yield, index bark. Local cutters were numbered, rotated, watched. A single missed harvest meant punishment, and punishment meant pain. Yet even they couldn't erase the sacred. You walk into Kataragama, where saffron-robed monks pass veiled Tamil pilgrims, and peacocks scream like gods being strangled. The temple lies open to all. Muslims pray here. Hindus chant. Buddhists light oil lamps. A Catholic might kneel and still not be out of place. There's no doctrine, only energy. Vibration. The same force that pulls the tides towards cinnamon groves. Cinnamon wasn't just a spice. It was myth. It anointed pharaohs. It burned in Roman funerals. The Greeks swore it grew in nests guarded by phoenixes. Here, it was used in offerings, scraped into fire, stirred into rice for the gods, pressed into wounds like a spell. But spells don't stop bullets. In 1796, the British landed. Not with ceremony, with calculation. They didn't ask. They demanded. They didn't fight. They administered. Every tree was now a ledger. Every cutter a column in an account book. They taxed saplings. They restructured the spice trade into a machine that never slept. And they wrote everything down. Cold, dry, perfect penmanship. Between the lines, centuries of theft. Cinnamon was no longer sacred. It was imperial. And yet, it never fully broke. You walk the Gal Fort walls, where Dutch bricks sit on Portuguese stone under British flags. The sea is violent tonight. Salt whips your face. A boy sells you spiced tea through a rusted gate. He grins. Cinnamon curls on the steam like an old truth refusing to vanish. Inside the fort, a mosque glows beside a church, beside a coval, beside a house with a Star of David above the door. They never left. None of them. Arab, Portuguese, Dutch, British. They all came for cinnamon. They all stayed for something else. But the island remained the same. Wild, wet, holy. You cross inland to Kandy, where the tooth relic rests. A fragment of the Buddha, guarded like gold, worshipped like breath. When the kings of Kandy resisted colonial rule, they tied legitimacy to the relic. Not blood, not sword, faith. Even cinnamon bowed to it. The Dutch tried to steal the relic. The British tried to shame it. But it endured, carried in procession under tusked elephants, draped in silk, hidden during invasions. Its shrine still smells of cinnamon bark and camphor, still pulsing, and still dangerous. Because in Sri Lanka, commerce and the sacred never separated. The cinnamon trade ran on belief as much as coin. Every port was watched by gods. Every cutter bled with prayer. Even the invaders, especially them, felt it. They wrote letters home describing heathen rites and strange temples. But their hands shook when they passed through the groves. They knew. The trees knew. And tonight, standing in the rain outside a cinnamon drying shed, you know too. You breathe. The scent hits the back of your throat. Sweet, warm, and sharp as memory. Somewhere beneath your feet, the road keeps moving. It doesn't care what flag you carry, only what you steal, and what you lose. The sea didn't roar. It whispered, low, wet, relentless. In the dark before sunrise, the Strait of Malacca looked like a polished blade, silent, shining, waiting to cut. Somewhere beyond the mist, wooden hulls knocked gently against one another. Anchored, unmoving, like they knew what was coming. And then the drums began. One, then three, then dozens, each echoing through the bamboo walls of the ancient port. Not war drums. Not yet. These were rhythms of trade, but in this place, trade was war by another name. You stood still. The humidity pressed down like a hand around your throat. Somewhere in that invisible harbor, a Sumatran merchant was bribing a Javanese captain. A Chinese scribe was counting coins by moonlight. An Arab imam was praying silently in the dark, even as the tide pulled spices and secrets into the bloodline of empire. This was Malacca, but it could just as easily be Palembang, Kedah, or any port in the watery bones of Southeast Asia. The map here never held still. It shifted with the tides, the winds, the mouths of kings. There were no borders, only coasts and currents and chaos. In the 7th century, this sea wasn't open. It belonged to Srivijaya, not an empire carved in stone, but in motion, a naval kingdom, fluid, predatory, thousands of ships under a single crown. Their capital, Palembang, rested on the banks of the Musi River, hidden by mangroves and veils of incense smoke. Every arrival was watched, every departure taxed. The spice trade didn't pass through Srivijaya, it bowed to it. The Chinese called it Shirley Fashi. The Arabs feared it. The Indians supplied it. And its heart was Hindu-Buddhist. Temples carved in jungle stone, monks chanting across the straits, Sanskrit echoing in palm leaf manuscripts that traveled farther than most kings ever would. But you wouldn't know that from the silence in the ruins today. You stand where the stone used to rise, where kings once received gifts from Tang China and Chola India. Now it's moss and wet roots. The temple bells are gone, but the water still carries weight. You hear a splash far off and stop breathing. The trees lean in. There's something about this place that's never gone cold. Because Srivijaya didn't vanish. It sank, not in defeat, in absorption. By the 13th century, another tide began to rise, Islam. Not by blade, not by decree, but by trade. Muslim merchants from Gujarat, Hadramaut, and Hormuz didn't come to convert, they came to buy. But their prayers, their fairness, their discipline, they spread faster than fire in a spice field. Malacca became the next fulcrum. Founded around 1400 by a runaway prince from Sumatra, it was nothing at first. A fishing village, a name whispered on the lips of passing dhows. But it had location, and that was everything. Every ship between the Indian Ocean and South China Sea passed Malacca or risked disaster. It didn't need an army. The wind was its soldier. Within 50 years, Malacca was the axis of maritime Asia. Arab traders offloaded frankincense, gold, and dates. Chinese junks docked with silk, porcelain, and monks. Burmese merchants arrived with rubies. Tamils brought cloth dyed red as spilled blood. The port became a collision of tongues: Malay, Tamil, Arabic, Cantonese, Persian, Tagalog, Sanskrit. 1,000 accents, 1,000 masks. But behind each one, trade. And yet it was never just about money. In the mosques of Malacca, imams quoted the Quran under palm fronds woven with Chinese motifs. The Sultanate minted its own currency, wrote its own law, but tolerated 100 gods. Hindu shrines still stood. Buddhist mantras echoed through shadowed alleys. The city didn't erase faith, it layered it. You walk the old quarter now, and the stones beneath your feet know everything. You step past a colonial building with Dutch shutters, then a mosque with Chinese eaves, then a Hindu shrine still lit by ghee-soaked flames. And overhead, the shadow of the old Portuguese fort still watches. Because in 1511, the cannon fire finally came. Afonso de Albuquerque didn't want diplomacy. He wanted control. The Portuguese sailed in with steel, fire, and unrelenting faith. Within days, Malacca burned. The Sultan fled. Mosques were sacked. Ships were seized. But the spice routes refused to die. The sea rerouted. The trade bent, then recoiled. The Portuguese held the city, but not the hearts. Even in defeat, Malacca whispered. And the sea listened. Then came the Dutch. Then the British. They left buildings, papers, borders, but not ownership. The Malay world never belonged to them. The water made sure of that. Today in Indonesia, the air still smells like cloves and gunpowder. Walk through Bandar Lampung, Makassar, Ternate, and Ambon, and you hear the old names spoken soft but firm. Srivijaya, Majapahit, Malacca. The empires of stone fell, but the sea never forgot. Fishermen still sail by stars, past islands where bronze statues once stood. Markets still trade in nutmeg measured by eye, not by gram. Spice routes buried by time still rise when the wind shifts. And if you're quiet, truly quiet, you might hear the rhythm beneath it all. The drumbeat in the mist. The low chant of a priest beside the harbor. The scrape of sandalwood dragged across stone. Because the maritime maze of Southeast Asia was never meant to be solved. Only entered. And once you enter, it doesn't let you go. The soil still smells like gunpowder. You step onto Banda Nera's cracked pier, and the waves lap too gently, as if the sea itself is ashamed of what it once carried. On the far end of the island, an old Dutch fortress looms, half swallowed by moss, its cannons now mute, pointing nowhere. There are no soldiers, no flags, just wind, just silence. But the silence is not empty. It's watching you. It was never just about nutmeg. The Banda Islands, tiny, volcanic, scattered like forgotten teeth across the Banda Sea, once held the world in their hands. In the 16th century, a handful of trees grew here that grew nowhere else. Nutmeg, Myristica fragrans. Fragile, fragrant, powerful. Europeans believed it cured the plague. They burned it in churches, crushed it in medicines, hoarded it in locked chests like it was sin made solid. The price soared so high that entire empires cracked chasing its scent. But on these islands, the people didn't call it profit. They called it life. They harvested it with bare hands, dried it under sun and smoke, wrapped it in woven baskets lined with meaning. The trade was sacred, communal, carefully balanced with rain, rituals, and risk. The Bandanese knew their land, their trees, their sea, and they knew exactly how much could be given without breaking. And then the ships came. Portuguese first, greedy, fumbling, then the English, and then the Dutch. They didn't ask. They calculated. In 1602, the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, was born. A company with the power to wage war, mint currency, and colonize entire nations. It wasn't a government. It was a machine. Its sole purpose, profit at any cost. And in Banda, that cost was blood. The Bandanese resisted. They traded with the English. They refused monopolies. They demanded dignity. The Dutch called it defiance. So in 1621, Governor-General Jan Pietersen Cohen arrived with ships, steel, and a plan. He was not a man of patience. He was a man of orders. He ordered a massacre. The VOC soldiers swept across the islands like a curse. They burned homes. They slit throats. They hanged village leaders from breadfruit trees. They tied elders to boats and dragged them behind canoes until the waves swallowed their screams. The nutmeg groves ran red. Fields turned to ash. Children were seized. Women vanished. Between 10,000 and 15,000 Bandanese lived on these islands before the conquest. Fewer than 1,000 remained after. And still, the trees kept growing. Cohen called it order. The company called it victory. They enslaved people from other islands to tend the nutmeg groves, now divided into Dutch plantations, Perkin. European planters ruled them like little kings, meting out punishment with whips and branding irons. Banda became a plantation archipelago. The air was heavy with sweat, rot, and spice. A single nutmeg seed was worth a week's labor and a month's pain. You walk the fields now, and it's too quiet. The trees are still here, gnarled, ancient, bearing fruit, but no laughter echoes between them. No songs. Just wind in the leaves and the low hum of insects that know what history tastes like. On the southern shore, Fort Belgica stands like a wound carved in basalt. Five-pointed, brutal. You walk its walls. The cannons stare into the sea as if waiting for ghosts. And they come, if you stay long enough. The prisoners chained in the dungeons left marks on the stone, names, prayers, curses scratched into the volcanic rock with fingernails and stolen nails. You touch the wall. It's cold, even in the heat. The Dutch called it discipline. The Bandanese called it death without burial. But the land remembers. On AI Island, local farmers still point to crumbled graves lost under vines and whisper names forbidden for centuries. Names of chiefs, of women who fought, of sailors who escaped. They hide oral histories inside lullabies and harvest chants, passed down through ancestors who refused to die silent. You meet an old man under a nutmeg tree, his hands stained from the mace he dries each morning. He doesn't speak much Dutch, but he says this in Bisa. Orang Belanda piker Marika ambel semuanya. Tapi Marika tidak ambel hati pelo ini. The Dutch thought they took everything, but they didn't take the island's heart. In 1667, after years of blood and war, the Dutch traded the island of Run, one of the Bandas, claimed by the English, for another island across the world, Manhattan. The nutmeg one. That's not just history. That's insanity. That's the value the world once placed on these islands. This soil. These trees. Now, most visitors never come. Flights land in Ambon. Tourists bypass Banda for Bali. But if you come here, if you stand here, you feel it. Not nostalgia, not pity, fury, grief, memory, the kind that's etched into land and lungs. The sea looks beautiful, but it has carried horrors, and the nutmeg still blooms. You crush one seed between your fingers. The scent rises, warm, sweet, sharp, like something sacred that once fed a god and now feeds a silence. And far off, from the hills, someone is singing. A song older than VOC records, older than Dutch maps, older than colonial flags. A Bandanese song. A voice not erased. It doesn't rise in anger. It doesn't need to, because the island speaks louder than any flag ever flown over it. And the trees are still listening. The fog rolled in off the Pearl River like a secret. Heavy, pale, smothering. Everything was still. Not quiet, still. As if the air itself were listening, waiting. Somewhere beyond the mist, a bell rang once, sharp, metallic, then gone. A ripple cut across the water. Then another. Shapes began to emerge. Flat hulls, tall masts, slanted sails. Junks. Hundreds of them. Floating, anchored, watching. You're in Guangzhou, but it doesn't feel like a city. It feels like a conspiracy. The docks are silent stone, slick with centuries of sweat and tea water, stained with porcelain dust, and the scent of muslin silk wrapped in oil paper. Every plank beneath your feet remembers something it cannot say aloud. You look up. You swear you see shadows moving along the warehouse rafters. You blink. They're gone. In 1757, the Qing dynasty closed all but one door to China. That door was Canton. And it wasn't just a port, it was a bottleneck. A chokehold on the global pulse. For over a century, all foreign trade, Dutch, Portuguese, British, American, was forced through this narrow, controlled mouth of empire. You could sail the oceans, bribe kings, cross deserts, but in Canton, you bowed. The Canton system wasn't built on trust. It was built on control. Only licensed Chinese merchants, the Kohong, could deal with outsiders. Only designated warehouses, the 13 factories, could store foreign goods. And only one season per year. You didn't enter China. You waited outside, like a dog scratching at the door. The Qing court feared the West, but they feared chaos more. And Guangzhou held the line. You stand now in the shadow of where the 13 factories once stood. Nothing remains. Not really. Concrete has swallowed the past. Steel cranes now tower where riverboats once crowded. The air hums with container engines, not human voices. But if you close your eyes, you can still feel the weight. Tea, porcelain, silk, not commodities, currencies, addictions. The West didn't just want them. It needed them. English elites needed their fine china. Boston merchants needed their green tea. Fashion houses in Paris begged for Chinese satin. And they paid with silver, tons of it, shipped by galleon, by brig, by bare hands. And still the Qing refused to yield. Foreigners were barred from learning Chinese. They couldn't bring weapons. They couldn't stay year-round. They couldn't touch the empire. They could only orbit it, powerless. So they plotted instead. The British grew opium in India and sold it back to China, quietly at first, then in waves. The silver stopped flowing east. It began bleeding west. And Guangzhou? Guangzhou became the epicenter of decay. One hand grasped silk, the other trembled from smoke. The Chinese officials knew. The emperor knew. But Guangzhou was too valuable to burn, too dangerous to let grow wild. The air here, even now, carries the residue of that standoff. You walk through the Haizhu district and feel the tension under the streetlights. The neon is bright. The buildings rise like glass obelisks. But the river knows. Because this is where the first cracks formed. This is where the Opium War began. 1839, Commissioner Lin Zexu. He marched to the foreign factories, seized the opium, and destroyed it, 3 million pounds, in front of the sea. The The traders protested. The British Parliament prepared, and the cannons followed. By 1842, Guangzhou was breached. The Canton system shattered. The Treaty of Nanking signed. The Qing humiliated. And the sea, the South China Sea, turned from protector to invasion route. You look out at the ships now, and they aren't wooden. They're steel. Behemoths. Stacked with metal containers, 20 high. Loaded with electronics, plastics, toys, machinery. They glide through the same waters once charted by Ming sailors, Dutch cartographers, and Portuguese smugglers. But the shape of power remains unchanged. Whoever controls these waters controls the world. The sea lanes around Guangzhou are the busiest on Earth. Trillions in trade pass through them, through the same straits where pirate fleets once hunted Dutch cargoes, where British frigates shelled coastal towns, where Chinese coastal patrols now shadow U.S. submarines beneath the waves. The ghosts here wear uniforms, flags, corporate badges. Their weapons aren't spears or swords, but sanctions, tariffs, and underwater drones. In Guangzhou, it's alive, but not free. It's a city stitched to the water with rusted anchors and invisible contracts. Beneath the skyscrapers, a current runs cold and ancient, carrying echoes of merchant chants, cannon blasts, and contracts signed in blood and ink. You walk the modern port. The cranes hiss overhead. Container doors slam shut like execution chambers. Somewhere, a dock worker hums a folk song. Off-key, low, ancestral. You stop. You listen. You don't recognize the tune, but your heart stutters anyway. It knows. You step farther. Through the narrow alley where once a tea merchant argued with a French captain. Past the ruin of an old Qing wall, now buried beneath plastic trash and concrete fences. You touch the stone. It's smooth. It's cold. It's still here. And then, like a thunderclap, a container slams down behind you. You flinch. You turn. But there's no one looking. Just machines. And fog. Guangzhou never screams. It whispers. Through the sails of ancient junks now sunk under diesel wakes. Through the cracked porcelain buried beneath hotel lobbies. Through the silence of a system that never truly died, only evolved. You breathe in, and the scent that greets you isn't just salt. It's steam from tea leaves, dust from broken clay, a trace of silk crushed into paper centuries ago. And just like that, Guangzhou has taken hold. Not as a city, as a memory you can't escape. And the river flows on. A silence lives in the sick that doesn't belong to this world. Not the silence of absence, but of something waiting, watching. A narrow slit of stone, carved by wind and time, wraps around you like the throat of a god about to speak. The walls rise, blood-red, gold-veined, impossibly tall. Light filters in as if it's trespassing. You step slowly. Every footfall sounds like a betrayal. And then, without warning, it hits you. A crack in the rock. A shaft of sunlight. A structure so impossible it shouldn't exist. Petra. The treasury doesn't announce itself. It erupts. Columns rise out of the cliff like they were pulled from another dimension. Stone sculpted with such terrifying precision that it dares you to breathe too loud in its presence. 2,000 years ago, this wasn't a lost ruin. It was a checkpoint, a fortress, a bank vault carved into a canyon. A Nabatean message to the world. We own this land, and what moves through it. And everything moved through it. Frankincense, myrrh, spices, gold, embroidered linen, salt, copper, glass, papyrus, and fear. From Arabia to the Levant, the incense road bled through Petra, and the Nabateans made it pay for every drop. They weren't empire builders. They didn't conquer cities with spears. They mastered water in the desert. That was their weapon. You walk the wadi now, and the heat bites at your skull, but you notice it. Carved channels in the walls, aqueducts, covered pipes, rock-cut cisterns. Miles of hydraulic brilliance hidden in plain sight. They harvested flash floods. They diverted the impossible. They trapped rain. Petra was born of drought and turned it into gold. You reach a high ledge and stop. Below, a vast necropolis yawns open. Tombs stacked like warnings. Porticos, columns, facades. Each one cut into the mountain with surgical cruelty. These weren't homes for the dead. They were monuments to control. If you moved goods through this land, you paid. In coin, in goods, in loyalty. And if you didn't, you vanished into the canyon. By the 1st century BCE, The Nabateans owned the trade. Frankincense from Dhofar, myrrh from the Hadramaut, both worth more than silver, smuggled across the Arabian sands by camel trains. And Petra was the choke point. No incense reached Gaza, Damascus, or Alexandria without Petra's blessing. You touch the rock. It's warm, almost pulsing. This wasn't a city built for mortals. It was a nerve center of ancient commerce. A switchboard wired to every scent-filled altar in Rome, Athens, and Jerusalem. The priests may have chanted over their fires, but it was Nabatean hands who sold them their god's breath. And they guarded that breath with silence. They left no grand libraries, no written laws, just architecture and ashes. Their script survives, but their voices don't. Even Rome couldn't crack them for decades. When they finally absorbed Petra in 106 CE under Trajan, it wasn't through conquest. It was because the trade moved. The incense roads shifted west. Petra's control collapsed not with fire, but with irrelevance. You stand now in the heart of a theater carved into the rock. Seats arranged in sweeping rows. Dust swirls in the sunbeam cutting across the stage. You close your eyes. You hear nothing. No footsteps. No murmurs. Just wind hissing through the cracks like the last breath of a dead empire. And yet the city isn't dead. Not really. Because you walk the trade paths even now. Through Wadi Musa. Across the empty tracts of Edomite soil. Toward the ruins of Nabatean strongholds. You pass shepherds who can trace their family names back to those who bartered with spice kings. You meet Bedouins who still whisper about Petra as if it's a secret you've stumbled into by mistake. A few even warn you not to stay too long. Because Petra changes you. The longer you walk her paths, the more the silence fills you. The rock walls start to speak in symbols. The carved niches start to watch. The faceless tombs press down on your chest. Not with sorrow, but with certainty. This place remembers every trader who crossed it. Every caravan that broke its laws. Every camel that bled on its steps. And it demands you feel it too. You climb toward the monastery. Aldair, step after step, winding through cliff stairways that test your breath and your nerve. The heat feels personal now. The rocks close in, then open violently. And there it is. A temple, wide as a fortress, towering above the valley, cut clean into the mountain. No cement, no bricks, just absence removed from stone. You sit at its base, knees trembling, heart slamming against your ribs. It looks down at you like a god not asking for worship, but demanding memory. And you remember, not just incense, not just trade. You remember the scent of wealth carried through sandstorms. The feel of rope biting into hands pulling water uphill. The breathless terror of travelers entering the sick for the first time. The blood of those who tried to pass without paying. The pride of a people who made desert bend to will. Petra was never lost. It was hidden, buried in silence. And now, walking these trails, alone, skin burning, breath shallow, you understand why. Because Petra isn't ruins. It's a threat. To those who think stone fades. To those who believe power lies only in armies. To those who forget that water is sharper than iron and silence louder than war. You descend, shadows stretching long behind you. The canyon swallows the sun. The walls turn dark, and the path waits for your next step. The sand doesn't move. It waits, still as bone, dry as prayer, and hotter than any sun should be allowed to burn. The silence is absolute, so wide and ancient it feels like the last breath of the world still echoes in it. You step forward. The earth cracks beneath your feet, not in sound, but in memory. This is Hijaz, Arabia's spine, and every grain beneath your boots once bore the weight of spice, silk, gold, and prophecy. Ahead, the mirage shivers. A wavering line, far off in the furnace horizon. But it's not water. It's the bones of a road, an old road, not made by men with maps, but by beasts with hooves and tongues that tasted only dust. Camel trails, beaten by centuries of caravans. Traders, raiders, pilgrims, prophets, and before it all, Mecca. But not the Mecca of minarets and global faith. No, the older one, pre-Islamic. The crossroads, a sacred center not just of belief, but of trade. A city guarded by gods now forgotten, crowded with idols, ruled by merchant clans who turned incense into currency. It wasn't the Kaaba that made Mecca rich. It was what moved around it. Frankincense from the south, myrrh, Indian pepper, Abyssinian slaves. Textiles, swords, stories, power. Every caravan that stopped here paid, not in coin alone, but in allegiance, in silence, in access. The Quraysh, the dominant tribe, controlled the gates. They brokered truces between tribes. They guaranteed safe passage across deserts where men vanished and reappeared only as legend. Their camels numbered in the thousands. Their eyes watched every deal. And above it all stood the Kaaba, already ancient, already ringed by bloodless treaties during the sacred months when even murder paused. But Mecca was not alone. The routes twisted north, through scorched wadis and basalt plains. And there, Medina, the city of dates and soil, a place of agriculture, refuge, and waiting. Not a commercial giant, but something else. A stage. You can still feel it now, as you walk the old road between the two cities. 450 kilometers of earth scarred by the rise of Islam. Muhammad walked this path, not as a merchant, but as a fugitive. In 622 CE, the Hijra, a movement not of conquest, but revolution. And the desert remembers. The wind picks up. You taste it. Iron, salt, and something else, something burned into the sand itself. Not blood, not yet, but transformation. The kind that makes empires buckle centuries after it begins. Before all that, before the Quran, before the swords, before the flags, this place thrived on exchange. Arabic wasn't the tongue of theology. It was the language of contracts, of weights and measures, of merchant gossip in smoky tents. The Nabateans had passed this way. So had Roman agents. So had Sabaean spice kings and Ethiopian emissaries. The Red Sea bustled with dhows. The incense route bled into Petra. But here, Hijaz was the fuse, and it lit when no one expected it. The sun overhead pulses like a curse. You walk through ancient caravanserai ruins, tumbled stones, dry wells, inscriptions worn to the edge of erasure. There are no crowds, just silence and heat, and the steady ache of realization. This desert isn't empty. It's loaded with ghosts. Camels once groaned through this exact pass. Hobbled at night, their knees bound. Their keepers whispered around fires, eyes scanning the dark for bandits or betrayal. They hauled sacks of silk, jars of perfume, hides full of spice. Sometimes gold, always fear, for the desert doesn't forgive mistakes. The stars were their maps, but trust was their compass. Because every caravan needed allies, guides, watchmen, translators, warriors. Every trade route was a network of negotiation, and Arabia was its bottleneck. And yet, it was not empires that controlled these sands. It was tribes, fragmented, armed, proud. Their rivalries flared like desert lightning. But they were tied together by fragile contracts, trust built on trade. To cross the Red Sea or move inland from the Persian Gulf, you needed the tribes of Hijaz. Not just for safety, for credibility. Even in chaos, there were rules. Even among pagans, there were oaths. The balance held, until a merchant disappeared into a cave at Hira and came down carrying a message that would shatter the system. It's here, on this sand, that the world tilted. You look up. The heat distorts the edges of everything. But you swear you see it, etched in mirage and memory. A caravan, long silent, camels swaying like ships at sea, men with turbans, faces carved by the sun, some armed, some tired, all moving north. They're headed to Medina. And you know what that means. The prophet will return with them, not as a merchant, not as a fugitive, but as a leader. And Mecca will fall, and the Kaaba will be cleared, and trade will not vanish, it will bend. You wipe the sweat from your eyes and keep walking. Somewhere ahead, modern roads intersect this old one. Highways now, built for speed and forgetting. But beneath the asphalt, the sand still holds the groove of ancient feet. And if you press your ear to the ground, you still might hear the hooves, the whispers, the arguments, the prayers, the betrayal, the oath beneath a tree, the treaty at Hudaybiyah, the footsteps circling the Kaaba after the conquest. You keep walking, because the trade didn't end with war. It adapted. Faith didn't erase the market, it hallowed it. Islam sanctified commerce. The Prophet himself said, "The honest merchant will stand with the prophets." And so, the caravans continued. But now, they carried more than goods. They carried belief. You pass old stones, milestones perhaps, or the corner of a broken rest stop. The kind where deals were made over dates and goat milk. The kind where maps changed hands. where merchants spoke of northern cities, Jerusalem, Damascus, Baghdad, of foreign ships coming to Jeddah, of coins stamped in Byzantine or Sasanian symbols, now repurposed in the new world dawning across the sands. You feel it all, the fire under your soles, the pulse in the air, and the weight of a truth no empire ever wanted to admit. The fate of continents was once decided by camel hooves on this desert floor, and the desert hasn't forgotten. The wind cut across the dunes like steel. A silence hung heavier than sand. Endless, empty, except for the faint crunch beneath your boots, salt-crusted earth shattering underweight. You stand at the edge of the Sahel, looking west. Behind you, the Sahara stretches like a dry wound. Ahead, the trade begins. A corridor of gold and salt. From Timbuktu to Marrakesh. Every grain of salt carried thirst. Every flake of gold carried ambition. And between them, souls. Slaves marched in caravans hundreds strong. Thousands of camels loaded with bullion passed through the same track worn by scholarly feet, by traders' footsteps, by ambition absolute. You tread where emperors built and died. Where Musa Musa crossed in 1324 with a retinue draped in gold, dropping dust like coins on desert towns. Timbuktu erupted in wealth, but not just wealth. After Musa Musa left, it blossomed into scholarship. Scribes wrote on leather, on papyrus, on wooden tablets. Manuscripts filled with science, law, poetry, mathematics. Books traded like currency. Gold and words shared the same value. But you feel the weight first, not prestige, pain. You walk into a Tuareg encampment at dusk. Their blue turbans blend with the dark sky. No sound, just patience. One man steps forward, his face half hidden. He says nothing, but his eyes hold centuries. He points north, the caravan route, the same path his ancestors guided. Salt from the Sahara to Timbuktu, gold from the mines of Bambuk to coastal ports. Slave caravans descended too. Men, women, children bound for North Africa, for markets beyond the sea. Their bodies are not myth. Their cries not silent. You follow the route west. Nights are cold, stars too bright. You taste dust on your tongue, but the Tuareg guard you. They move as shadows. Piracy, bandits, foreign armies, they know all. They carry oral maps stitched into melody. Every dune is a story. Every night sky holds a memory. You cross a salt flat. Crystals shine white under moonlight. Camels once knelt here. Caravans rested. Slaves hobbled there. You feel tears in your throat. Not pity. Recognition. The same path that brought scholarship also brought slavery. Timbuktu's golden gates were built with both gold and blood. At the city gates, you find it. Jingareber Mosque, 1327. Sun-baked mud walls ring you in. Patterns carved in plaster sway in torchlight. The air smells of millet and books. Students read by lantern inside. They quote Ibn Battuta, Al-Ghazali, Ibn Khaldun. Their voices echo off pillars centuries old. You hear strain and joy intertwined. Knowledge gained on a spine of suffering. At the market, Tuareg silver adorns waiting traders. Salt blocks piled like chalk towers. Gold nuggets glitter in wooden bowls. Every deal negotiated with handshake and curse. The merchants smile, voices smooth, polite. But their eyes flick to the manuscripts, some offered, some stolen, all precious. You step into a dusty alley, manuscripts pressed under robes. Each page fragile. Your fingers tremble. They hold knowledge that nearly vanished. Because empire returned. Songhai rose. Then Moroccan forces invaded in 1591. Army with guns, cannons, and iron conviction. Timbuktu burned. Scholars scattered. Gold stolen. Salt routes rerouted. And the Sahel muttered, "Power always comes with cruelty." You trace the route westward now. To Marrakesh, solid red walls rising from the ochre dust. Caravans arrive from the far reaches, Tuaregs, Arabs, sub-Saharan traders, Berber clans. The city smells of spices, mint tea, metalwork, and leather. Gold from Mali traded for North African horses. Salt for textiles. And sometimes, slaves. The air hums with negotiation and prayer. In a Riyadh courtyard, a Tuareg plays imzad under date palms. The music is sorrow and pride together. You close your eyes. You see the caravan trails etched in endless sand. You smell smoke from cooking millet. You taste salt residue on your lips. And you realize, this route was never just about profit. It was power, mobility, Faith, domination, creation. A merchant approaches with a smile. He offers you salt, a block wrapped in leather. You hold it. Coarse, cold, but heavy. He says in Arabic. This road takes breath, but it gives only to those who understand it. You're not sure if it's a warning or a promise. You breathe in glass dust from the mosque, sunlight from the manuscripts, salt from the caravans. The sweat on your skin carries sunburn and salt and dust and memory. The Tuareg shadows stretch long as sunset bleeds across the walls. A new caravan forms behind you. Horses, men, packs, salt, gold, maybe souls. The route doesn't end. It loops into desert again, into wind again. Your heart pounds. You step forward. Because this road isn't done with history. History is still walking it. The call to prayer echoes across the Nile at dawn, but the river answers with silence. You stand on the banks where centuries of trade began, not with steam, not with engines, but with human breath and sweat. The water shimmers gold in the early light, but it carries shadows of pharaohs and merchants, of slaves and emperors. The first breath you take tastes of dust and river and expectation. Cairo is the throat of two worlds. Here, the Nile pours into the Mediterranean, and Africa pours its goods into Egypt's hands. Grain, ivory, gold, exotic wood, and most of all, incense, spices, silks traded over the Red Sea. From the port of Aden, across the Red Sea, to Aqaba, down to the Valley of Kings. Jerusalem, Alexandria. This was the ancient artery before Rome, before Byzantium. Trade pulsed here with divine ambition. You walk past the citadel, stone walls dark with centuries. You feel the press of empire. Inside, Ottoman muskets once pointed toward the desert. Foreigners once knelt. Pharaohs once ruled. Every layer of Cairo carries commerce carved in stone. In the 9th century, under the Abbasids, ships multiplied, laden with frankincense from Dhofar, copper from Yemen, spices from India. Arab dhows crowded the Red Sea ports. Traders sailed with scriptures and ledgers alike. Islam had opened the sea to faith and profit together. You imagine their arrival, sails at dawn, drums in the hold, merchants stumbling ashore under desert sun, eyeing the horizon, eyeing Cairo's skyline rising through haze. Mosques, minarets, domes, stone sermons declaring faith and power intertwined. You walk Cairo's old quarter at midday, heat pressing your chest. You descend into the Khan el Khalili Bazaar. Bronze gleams. Carpets hang like blood-red banners. Spices in burlap sacks hiss with aroma. Cumin, saffron, coriander. Cotton bales carry cloth dyed in madder. Perfume drops rest on fingers. Every breath feels holy and dangerous. This market breathes ancestry. From the bustling stalls, pilgrims once traveled south towards Suez. From Suez they launched into the Red Sea. Spices, myrrh, obsidian, linen savored in Byzantium. Pharaoh's flax sailed new seas. Egypt's old wealth flowed outward, and every vessel that returned brought rumor of queens, of strange gods, of ports illuminated by incense, smoke, and lanterns. The Ottoman conquest in 1517 shifted authority, not ambition. Egypt's veins still pulsed with commerce. The Ottomans built mansions and warehouses, not in gold, but in limestone and trade rights. Cairo became the imperial storehouse. The Red Sea routes remained vital. You climb to a rooftop near Khan al-Khalili at dusk. Cairo trembles under fiber optics and streetlights now. Minarets glow against tower blocks. But the smell of parchment and spice still clings at night. You smell musk, incense, a faint trace of scarlet dye once pressed from exotic bark. You descend into a ruin beneath the citadel. A vaulted chamber, empty now, but not absent. Carvings line the walls, Arabic script woven into stone. Ottoman coins bear down from display cases. But beneath, the floor still whispers. You kneel and press a hand to cold rock. Traders once prostrated to pray beneath this stone. They measured grain. They sealed packs. They counted two metals, gold and faith. In the Red Sea port at Suez, you feel the salt bite. Ships unload containers now. Steel cranes roar. But you sense something older, dhows once tied to wooden posts. Men with dark eyes haggled over porcelain and coins. Camels waited in the dunes. Caravans crossed Sinai. Pilgrims passed through toward Mecca. Goods moved south, north, east. west, all through Cairo's arteries. Back in the labyrinth of Old Cairo, an imam recites verses from the Quran. His voice echoes off stucco lattices. Women in black chant quietly. Lanterns flicker by marble wells. At the thresholds, travelers tied camels. They fastened sails, packed skins of oil and grain. Prayers were said for safe passage to ports beyond. You walk outside the walls at midnight. The Nile bulges under moonlight, quiet, massive. A boat drifts. No mast, no sail, just a lantern. Inside, a man counting old coins. Nile mud under his fingernails. He looks up. For a second, his eyes are both merchant and monk. You hold your breath. This city isn't a relic. It is pressure, trade, faith, history welded into buildings and alleys. The past doesn't sit. It crowds you. You retrace your steps to the river. You glance toward the Red Sea horizon. Somewhere beyond the desert, vessels still carry goods, not incense, maybe oil, maybe electronics. But the pattern repeats: port, river, bazaar, empire. And Cairo marks the junction. The wind shifts. You smell history, and you feel the current again, never stopped moving, never stopped demanding. So you walk. Sunlight slashes across the Grand Canal, striking gondolas like blades. A lone trader leans from a pontoon, weighing silk wrapped in sea salt and smoke. His eyes are hard, waiting. The water's edge rumbles lightly. Wooden warehouses shift, unseen gears turn, and the air trembles with something old and relentless. This is Venice, the republic that built its veins on Eastern trade. No empire carved by swords. A merchant city grafted onto the sea. Its palaces rose not from conquest, but from contracts. Silk, spices, sugar, glass. From Constantinople to Alexandria. From Acre to Alexandria to Armenia. Every port birthing deals, diplomats, debts. In the 11th century, crusaders marched east. Venice wasn't just watching. It worked the corridors. Merchant diplomacy meant flags meant nothing unless carry merchant ships. The Fourth Crusade in 1204 arrived at Venice's invitation. Venetians loaded crates of weapons, provisions, and ideas. When the Crusaders turned on Constantinople, Venice didn't flinch. It claimed half the city, islands, ports, silk factories. You hear the echo in narrow alleys. A cloaked senator passes under Byzantine arches, marble still bleeding gold. He carries letters stamped with wax seals from Eastern courts. He trades silk for salt, sugar for influence, faith for promise. His voice is low. He doesn't shout. But every deal rattles across the Adriatic. You feel the weight in stone. The Rialto Bridge is more than wood. It's a ledger. Every plank soaked in silver. Below, merchants haggle over pepper, saffron, damask. The stalls smell of cinnamon and brine. Venetian glass beads glisten in sunlight. Thought so fragile until it outlasts steel. Each piece is a wager on sea lanes, storms, pirates. Merchant families didn't pray. They invested. And the church was not sanctuary. It was insurance, alliances brokered in chapels, marriages arranged for trade rights. The Dogaressa wore silk stitched with Persian motifs. The Doge sat beneath mosaics of saints, brokers sealing contracts after Mass. You taste this tension sipping espresso in Piazza San Marco. The sky is steel blue. Gondolas glide in silent procession. To the right, Byzantine mosaics glint. To the left, a cruise liner towers like an iceberg, a reminder, commerce still defines the city. You follow a corridor beneath Palazzo Ducale. In vaulted halls once echoing with senators, treaties were written. Salt from Tunis valued as gold. Fabrics from Egypt priced against Venetian ducats. Navigators read logbooks with Arabic margins. Caravans from Syria were underwritten by merchants on these marble floors. In the 15th century, Ottoman power grew. Constantinople fell in 1453. But Venice did not retreat. It pivoted, settled new paths. It signed treaties with Suleiman, sent ambassadors who learned Turkish, sent ships through the Black Sea, bought grain for famine, spices for decaying palaces, cotton for workshops. Dark days came. The Silk Road fractured. Portugal and Spain circled Africa. In 1498, Vasco da Gama sailed around the Cape to Calicut. Suddenly, Venice wasn't the gate. It was a threshold being bypassed. But Venetians adapted. They shifted to European trade. Salted cod, timber, iron, ideas. Renaissance painters bought Chinese pigments. Merchants bought manuscripts and coins from Asia. Yet the canals still pulse with the old rhythm. Behind carnival masks, deals are brokered. Behind closed shutters, shipping manifests are filled. In dusty corners of deserted warehouses, you smell aged cedar and mold. Leftover crates marked Damascus, Cairo, Persia. You step into a glass workshop on Murano. Firing kills hiss. Flames dance. The master craftsman lifts a chandelier dipped in cobalt and gold leaf, colors found first in the East. He doesn't say where. It's unspoken. Trade was silent. Trade was loyalty. Night falls. The lagoon grows still. The last vaporetto hums out, leaving water smooth as dark silk. In the distance, Leto's lights blink. You close your eyes. You hear the ghost of caiques from Alexandria, sifters of coffee, scripture-stained hands passing letters. You feel pressure in your chest, the legacy of brilliance built on trade, on diplomacy, on commerce construed as survival. Venice thrives still, not because of wars won, but because commerce never forgot it. And you realize the city wasn't built on bridges, masks, or canals. It was built on exchange. A breeze stirs the pine forest, sharp as glass. Sunlight fractures on amber-colored resin embedded in mossy roots. One brittle shard lies at your foot, warm from the sun. You pick it up. It's ancient, heavier than you expect. And suddenly you're aware, not of the forest, but the weight of something that moved through entire continents. This is the Amber Road. Long before roads carved by chariots and horses, Northern Europe fed Rome's appetite, with flashes of golden resin, flint axes, copper tools. Prehistoric hands shaped trade in silence. Amber means stone that burns. Early communities revered it, bartered it, buried it with the dead. The forest kept it secret, until men walked it. You follow a track through Lithuania, where Baltic tribes gathered amber from the dunes washed by the Baltic Sea. It wasn't easy. Storms ripped beaches, storms carried off treasure. Amber washed ashore cold and sharp, in spiral curls or honey-brittle chunks. Shaman women gathered it at dawn, sorting by glow, by flaw, by myth. They lit fires. They prayed. Amber held the breath of creation. That breath traveled south. By 500 BCE, Goths crossed into Poland, following amber trails inland. They carried it west, bartering with tribes beyond the Vistula River. The metalworkers of Lusatia received it. They shaped bronze swords and amber necklaces. They traded both to the Celts, and the Celts passed them to Romans. Rome craved amber more than gold. In Pompey's shops, pieces carved with Bacchus or eagles sold to the wealthy. Ambassadors from Baltic kingdoms came to Rome in 1st century BCE, offering amber and furs for silk, wine, and Roman citizenship. The Senate accepted. Laws passed to regulate merchants. By the reign of Augustus, amber had its own trade lanes and imperial escorts. You walk the dunes near Gdansk in northern Poland in early morning fog. A fisherman hauls driftwood from the waves. In the wood he finds pale resin. He calls it jantaras, amber. You feel its cold echo, an echo that once reached Rome. You trace the old road lines on your map. Forest tracks through Masuria, over marsh, to river ports like Krakow, then onward to Vienna, Regensburg, finally to Aquileia on the Adriatic shore, and from there by sea to Rome. Walking these routes now, you sense shifting power. In Lithuania, open fields show nothing but grass. But below lies trade history. Amber miners carving pits, traders hidden in villages. Towns like Klaipėda existed mostly to ship resin out. At night, fishermen passed smoky stories of Goths, of Teutonic knights searching for Baltic gems. In Poland, you walk to Albrechtoka forest. Resin drips from crushed branches. A local woman presses lumps into leather. She doesn't speak English. She says in Polish, "Ten sam los otyka time, ko rozimieni chili." This same forest breathes what Romans wanted. You cross into Germany, the Lusatian Lake District. Fields are wide, fences pale. You find ceramic shards, handmade pottery much older than you should expect. Amber dust clings to clay. Roman coins appear too, in farmhouse gardens. Each coin bears emperors, Trajan, Hadrian, men who valued amber as tribute. In Regensburg, once a Roman fort, now a city built of Roman stone and medieval towers. You stand in an alley paved with Roman stones. Tourists pass, but beneath your feet, the road hums. Ancient merchants walked these stones. They carried amber in goatskin pouches, coins jangling, hopes squeezed tight. You reach Nuremberg, where medieval trade revived the routes. Caravans from north delivered amber to workshops. Masters fashioned rosaries, combs, amulets. Churches demanded amber crosses. Jews traded amber across borders. Trade guilds formed rules. Representation in city halls. Quotes appear in 14th century chronicles. You pass through Munich, Innsbruck, descending the Alps toward Italy. The corridors narrow, passes fragranced by pine and chilled by altitude. Amber never traveled over these mountains easily. Traders paid guides. They slept in mountain huts. Some died from altitude, from thieves, from avalanches. The stuff that made the emperors shine demanded survival. At Aquileia, ruins meet the lagoon. This port once shipped amber to Alexandria, Constantinople, Rome itself. Fish skeletons lie fossilized among broken columns. You wade into shallows. You hold amber again, shaped by waves, by absent hands. You slip it into a pouch. At night, you hear monk chanting from ancient basilicas. It tastes of incense and cold stone. Amber lay in tombs. It lay on altars. Emperors wore it to feel connection to distant forests. Priests burned it in censers. The scent traveled before myth. You rest your palm on the worn basalt of the old Roman Forum. You taste something metallic, salt, and resin. Your heart pounds with gravity. This golden material moved more than adornment. It moved alliances. It moved migrations. It moved entire mentalities. You rise and keep walking. The forest route transforms into modern roads. Highways parallel silent ancient lines. But if you linger at the edge of a field or beside a pine tree at dawn, you can still feel the hum. The path never ended. It evolved. Trade layered itself. Iron gave way to rail. Romans gave way to Teutonic knights. Modern tourists give way to sweaty hands breaking dusk-fallen resin from roots. Money shifted. Power shifted. But amber still glowed. And the trail keeps reaching south. Toward Rome. Toward belief. Toward cities built on the spine of trade. You step forward, carrying amber and memory, the forest behind breathing slow. The route doesn't stop. It calls. A whisper drifts through the forest by the Neva River, soft, metallic, laden with salt and history. A lone Viking longship glides past your shore, blade sharp and hollow with memory. The river mirrors twilight. You feel the weight of footsteps before yours, echoing back from Burka, past Novgorod, along the Dnieper toward Constantinople. This is the Varangian route, a 1,000-mile network of rivers and portages connecting Burka, Novgorod, and Constantinople, forging paths of trade and steel across Eastern Europe. Burka on Lake Melerin, founded around AD 750, once thrummed with life. Traders came with furs, honey, amber, slaves. In graves, archaeologists found Chinese silk and glass from Byzantium, proof that Norse merchants had hooked into distant worlds. You walk its silent shoreline at dawn. Mist coils over water. Each stone hummed with ancient footsteps dragging furs across deck planks. From Burka, the route cuts south along the Neva into Lake Ladoga, south via the Fokhof River to Staraya Ladoga, the first Rus settlement, and on to Novgorod, which replaced Ladoga as the major center by the 9th to 10th centuries. You tread its square where dirhams glint beneath paving stones, relics of Abbasid silver that powered trade and politics. You cross into Ukraine. The Dnieper River sweeps south. You navigate rapids once feared and cursed by porters, rooted in runestones calling them Nizet, the insatiable. Along the banks lie shards, Byzantine beads, spices, icons, Slavic tribute, Norse axes. Goods flowed in both directions, furs and wax southward, silk, wine, silver northward. At Kiev, you pause beneath ancient walls. Viking mercenaries once knelt here under Rurik and Oleg. In 882 CE, Oleg seized the city, founding Kievan Rus. You touch carved stones, cold and worn, feeling the weight of alliances formed through trade, raids, and dynastic marriages. The McDonald's sign glows across the plaza. Yet beneath your feet, the remix of traded goods and faith pulses. You drift onto the Black Sea. A breeze brings salt and urgency. In Constantinople, the Varangian Guard waited, Scandinavian Norse warriors serving Byzantine emperors. They carved runes into Hagia Sophia, silent signatures of service and assimilation. You step inside. Candles flicker. Shadows cling to columns. Bronze lamps scent of twilight and oil. You hear ghostly echoes, footsteps of armored soldiers who traded swords for status. Alongside the Dnieper route, the Volga trade route spilled southward through Finnic and Permian lands to the Khazars, then to Volga Bulgars, and onward via the Caspian Sea to Baghdad and the Abbasid world. You follow gravel banks in the Volga Delta. No merchant sails here now, only reeds and mosquitoes. But you sense dirhams and slaves once passed through. Ibn Khordadbeh and Ibn Fadlan recorded Rus traders sailing caravans to Bulgar, crossing borders by pretending Christian status to enter Baghdad. At Novgorod, once called Holmsgard, you walk into markets still patterned on ancient lines. Viking furs once traded here. Apparitions of silver dirhams still gleam in bog graves. Manuscripts note silk from Antioch, wine from Byzantine, weapons from Scandinavia. You close your eyes. The trade doesn't end. It echoes. Merchants bargained in wooden booths. Guards washed bribe-laden crates. Sagas were sung in smoky halls. At Burqa graves, archaeologists unearthed textiles, gold brocade, silk floss, Chinese threads, rich clothing worn by northern traders, attesting to the complexities of Silk Road influence reaching even Scandinavia by the 10th century. You hold fragment of flax woven in patterns too exquisite. You taste regret. The route demanded lives through rapids, raids, river pirates, plague, and freezing winters. You travel today by asphalt roads that overlay ancient boat tracks. But at river crossings, like Gorodish, Nezdovo, remnants of cemeteries still lie. You feel their weight. You cross pontoon bridges remembering Ekaterina's runic stones marking deaths in Aestalandum and Serkland, Estonia and beyond, etched for men who never returned east. You paddle a replica gnar along a calm bend of the Lovat. Water laps the hull. You sense danger, rapids ahead, ambush opportunities, wolves in forest shadows. You taste sweat not fear, but readiness. Because this route demanded both commerce and guts. In Istanbul, in the Grand Bazaar, merchants still trade silk scarves and antique coins. Vaulted domes echo with oaths. Somewhere, a Turk touches a fragment of Kievan Rus glass. You sense trade's continuity. Constantinople is gone. Byzantium is dust. But the markets remember. You step to the Golden Horn waterfront. A tanker passes. Cranes unload containers, not dirhams or silk bolts, but electronics, textiles, oil. Yet the same current flows. Same cadence. Same entwined ambition. You breathe. The sunset reflects off water and mosaic shards. You carry nothing. But you think of furs, slaves, incense, silver ledgers. The route still hums beneath city skylines. Under river ice. Hidden in ceramic shards and runestones. In manuscripts and mercenary oaths. And you follow it. Forward, toward Baghdad's ghost and Byzantium's bones. Because the Varangian routes were never just for Vikings. They were for anyone bold enough to throw or into current and sail into history. The river never ends. Nor does the path. The surf crashes against ancient stone, yet silence dawns over Sinkarim's sands. Remnants of Fort Aguada stand guard, its ramparts mute, windows hollow, built in 1612 to fend off Dutch ships, to spy on horizons pregnant with ambition. You step inside. The air smells of brine and old mortar. A freshwater spring still seeps beneath arches where Portuguese sailors once begged relief from sea fever and longing. In 1498, Vasco da Gama stepped onto Malabar's shores and changed everything. Portugal had just cracked the world's edge. Da Gama's ships returned to Lisbon not with gold, but with spice, ambition, fear, and a promise of empire. King Manuel I declared war on old trade routes, built Casa de India to seize every ounce of profit, and turned Lisbon into the beating heart of a global machine. You walk the stone alleys of Old Goa, Velha Goa, once choked crowded with monsoon humidity and the hum of bells and bargaining voices. By the mid-1500s, it held more than 200,000 souls, churches, palaces, hospitals, but succumbed to malaria and declined by the 17th century. The Portuguese conquered it in 1510 under Afonso de Albuquerque, forging it into the capital of Portuguese India. a colony built on spice, faith, and control. Here, every corner whispers trade. Cloistered courtyards once stored pepper, cinnamon, cloves, commodities worth more than kingdoms. You smell musty stones, hear distant clattering of cargo being weighed, feel the weight of years underfoot. You sense caravels unloading cargo from Mombasa, Malacca, Macau, ports chained into the Portuguese spiral across the Indian Ocean. Above the Mandovi River, Fort Aguada watches the Arabian Sea. You climb the ramparts. Wind slices your face like salt-stung steel. Ships sail in modern lines below, containers not casks. Still, ghost sails populate horizons. They vanish when you blink. Every spice demanded a tower. Every fort claimed allegiance. The Cartaz license system, created in 1502, forced merchant ships to pay tribute or risk cannon fire, ensuring control at sea, in ports, and in every harbor from Goa to Ormuz, You enter St. Francis Church, built in 1503 in Cochin, the first European basilica in India. You trace cracked cross motifs carved in wood, taste dust of prayers and colonial power. Nearby, traders' ledgers, once in Portuguese script, turned palm leaf scrolls into record and rule. Between 1500 and 1510, forts sprang up along Africa's coast: Mozambique, Mombasa, Socotra, Muscat. In 1509, at the Battle of Gio, Muslim, Indian, Egyptian, and Ottoman forces united and failed. Portugal crushed them, claimed mastery over the sea lanes. Maritime dominance spread like a disease through islands, ports, corridors. You walk softly through old Goa's overgrown quarters. Moss climbs walls of churches where bishops once ruled, where Christian missionaries circled in uniforms, where Jesuits baptized spice kings. The population plummeted from 200,000 to barely 1,500 by 1775. Now silence dominates. But trade refuses silence. On a quay, fishermen unload fish. A pepper seller rubs kernels between calloused fingers. A trader ties silk ribbons dyed in cobalt and cinnabar. You barter, but not for spices. For memory. For the weight of what greed built and what time erodes. You stand beneath the cannons that once patrolled the harbor. You look toward the southern sea line traced by da Gama's fleet in May 1498, across Cape of Good Hope, touching Calicut on May 17, 1498. You taste salt and fear and ambition on your tongue. Every pulse of breeze carries it. The conquest of Malacca in 1511 secured the flows from Southeast Asia. Colombo in Sri Lanka in 1517 expanded control. Hormuz fell in 1515. Goa declared viceroyalty in 1505. Portuguese India operated for centuries across oceans and continents. Walking these ruins, you feel the edge of empire. Every cracked arch, every broken column, every cobwebbed stair, built not of faith only, but ambition. Missionaries followed merchants. Churches followed caravels. The spice trade became crucifix trade. Monks baptized porters. Taxes turned into tithes. The world shrank, and Lisbon's tan stones felt the weight. Yet, in markets off narrow lanes, Goan Catholics, Hindu Brahmins, Portuguese descendants weave together. Curry pots simmer next to fish festivals. Latin Mass and Hindu chanting echo under banana leaves. Even after annexation in 1961 and Portuguese rule officially ending in 1974, the soul persists. The spice never left. The price changed, but the route remains a presence. You walk from Fort Aguada inland to Panjim, Nova Goa, the capital since 1759. Under streetlights you pass Portuguese tiles cracked by rain. You touch graffiti in Konkani. You weigh pepper in open sacks. You handshake with porters. You taste curry in clay pots. Night drifts. Lanterns glow. The sea exhales. You feel the road beneath you pulsing, like time's artery. From Lisbon to Goa. From forts to markets to ruin. Every stone, every scent, every silence, still demanding your awareness. You raise your eyes to the dark water. You hear sails creak in memory. You walk on. The Pacific air tastes of brine and smoke as dawn breaks over Manila Bay. You stand on the shore and hear it. The distant creak of timbers and the faint throb of sails against the wind. You feel the weight beneath your feet. Worlds connected by silver and silk before even a word was spoken. 1565, the first galleon slips into port, its hull heavy with Mexican silver, mined from Zacatecas and Potosi. It enters Manila, Spain's foothold in Asia, to trade precious metal for Chinese silk, porcelain, spices, lacquerware, Indian cotton, Japanese lacquer, all hauled in junks to be offloaded into Spanish hands under vigilant eyes. You walk through the Real Alcaiceria de San Fernando, the Chinese merchant quarter in Manila, where silk bolts pressed with dragons and phoenixes exchange hands under shadows of Spanish roofs. Chinese labels brush against Tagalog scripts on parchment. Licenses called bolitas trade like contraband in storage rooms packed beyond official capacity, every inch loaded to the gunnels. Now feel the fear. Ships sailed only once a year. For months of monsoon storms, shipwrecks, scurvy. Only 4 galleons lost in over 2 centuries. It was a business built on precision, greed, necessity, comma. You breathe the tension on the docks, commanders tucking bribes into crested uniforms, clerks whispering tampered logs. You step aboard a replica galleon at the Museo del Galleon, still under construction in Manila. The wooden hull groans beneath your weight. The air is stiff, heavy with salt and smoke. You climb below decks, through dim cabins scented of pitch and fear, and feel every cargo crate stacked tight, a steel-bound coffin in waiting. You step off in Acapulco, Mexico. The street hums with a mix of Nahuatl and Spanish, and what you sense was Tagalog. Here, goods unload with ritual. Silk drapes, jars of porcelain weight of princes, spices perfuming the air like memory. The silver sacks, bulging with peso fuerte coins, glint under tropical sun. Every blade of grass here has felt that exchange. From Acapulco, the route snakes inland via mule train to Veracruz, then across the Atlantic to Seville, then onto Europe's wealthy elites. You stand on the docks in Veracruz, sea salt licking your cracked lips. Freight moves into fleets bound for Europe. Merchants mark inventories, silk from Suzhou, ivory from Manila, spices from the Moluccas, all bought with silver plucked from American soil. Feel the loop tighten here. Chinese emperors long barred Europeans. Ming bans attempted to curb trade in the 1560s. Yet by 1571, Manila had been founded. Urdaneta had found the return route across the Pacific, and silver flooded China at scale. The Chinese market thrived on Spanish silver, reversing centuries-old trade flows. Imagine the weight of that silver. 1/3 of all New Spain and Peruvian output went west across the Pacific. Coins minted in Mexico weighed down Chinese markets. Ming merchants counted them like rivers of light. Silk that cost 100 taels sold for 200 to 300 in Luzon. The arbitrage was absurd and brutally profitable. You trace colonial paths across oceans, through Manila's warehouses, Acapulco's porters, Veracruz's caravels. You see sinking, private smuggling, overloading beyond manifest weight, captains hiding contraband in cabins and decks. You smell tobacco, corn, cocaine, not the drug, but coca leaves, tomatoes, sweet potatoes, New World gifts that returned eastward, altering diets and economies on both sides. Hold the weight of a Manila shawl, the silk scarf embroidered in Chinese dragons, tucked into European pianos, worn by mestizo women in Madrid and Mexico. The motifs blended East Asian and Spanish styles. The fabrics traveled beyond expense. They carried identity. You feel the break of the system in the late 18th century. Spain opens reforms, trade loosens, American independence erupts. By 1815, the last galleon sails, and Manila falls into economic collapse. The first truly global trade route ends, even as new ones begin, yet traces linger. You walk modern Manila along Roxas Boulevard. Container ships block the horizon. Cargo cranes swing in mechanical symphony. You feel their hum like war drums. But beneath them lies memory. Beneath steel hulls, galleon timbers are buried under mangled piña shawls, broken porcelain, clouded kaolin jars. In Mexico, genetic traces of Filipinos remain. People in Guerrero and Acapulco carry Asian descent. Communities formed when Filipino sailors settled in the Americas centuries ago. Culture loops across the globe, with spoken Tagalog peeking into Spanish slang, with chili peppers simmering in adobo, threads sewn by Silk Road to Pacific trade. You close your eyes on a quay in Acapulco at sunset. The sea glistens, gold against red. The wind speaks of cargo holds, of oaths sealed in silver, of sails torn by monsoon storms and tropical gales. You feel the pressure again, silver for silk, faith for fortune, lives traded for profit. And the route loops behind you. You walk on. A high-speed container ship cuts across the Pacific at dusk, its bow slicing through waves like the prow of a merchant junk from centuries past. The sky darkens, and the air hums with unseen engines, a different kind of pulse than silk caravans carried. But the memory remains. You stand on deck, wind tearing through your jacket, and feel the weight of trade stretched from ancient roads to steel vessels. All that once moved by shifting dunes, camel caravans, and sailing junks now slides silently into massive container bays. The containerization revolution, born when the Ideal X sailed in April 1956, carrying 60 standardized boxes across the sea, redefined commerce. Goods ceased loading by hand and began gliding through ports built for steel boxes. Ports like Shanghai, Rotterdam, Singapore turned into undisputed hubs. Container ships now carry over 90% of global trade, their precision logistics shrinking oceans into daylight schedules. But beneath this modern skeleton lies something older, routes worn into human memory, mirrored in China's Belt and Road Initiative. Since 2013, BRI has funneled over $1 trillion of investment into highways, railways, ports, pipelines, connecting Asia, Africa, Europe, and beyond. Cargoes sprouted from desert mud into a rail port handling billions in transit annually. A mirrored ambition to ancient traders marries corridors of freight with veins of diplomacy. The 21st century maritime Silk Road loops from China through Southeast Asia and South Asia to East Africa via Suez, retracing ancient spice and silk seaways. Standing at a modern rail hub in Chongqing, you see freight containers stacking into boundless iron trains bound for Europe. The docking yards are structured like ancient caravanserai, warehouses and loading gates instead of tents and gates, but the energy is the same. In 2017, the first Iwu, London freight train covered 12,000 kilometers across 9 countries in 18 days, faster than any camel could carry silks to Venice. Yet shadows ripple. Shipping routes are strained by modern conflict. Red Sea lanes reroute ships around Africa after repeated attacks, adding weeks to journeys and destabilizing global supply chains. The sea that once carried incense, silk, and gold now carries microchips and oil, but remains as fragile as ever. Modern Eurasian corridors hum, but you remember the pulse of ancient paths, caravans across the Taklamakan, junks off Malacca, camels creeping across the Sahara. They moved goods and ideas. Now containers hold smartphones, t-shirts, electronics, but ideology still travels inside. Flagged ships, tariffs, sanctions, they are modern toll gates on ancient lines. Walking through layers of history, you trace a footstep in Dunhuang, near Corgos. Walk along river rail lines that once hosted Marco Polo's silken shipments across Xinjiang. Follow ancient caravan routes now paved, fenced, gated, but still vibrating with commerce. Listen for murmurs of driven camel hooves in the echo of cranes at ports. A container terminal in Djibouti hums like an engine. It links to Addis Ababa by rail. Containers roll inland into Ethiopia. It mirrors a 1,000-year-old chain of trade from Horn of Africa ports to hinterland kingdoms. Rail replaces caravan. Crate replaces sack. But the road remains, fluid, relentless. Walking ancient trade routes, from Silk Road to Spice Roads. You close your eyes in a port city at dusk, the smell of creosote and diesel replacing salt and spice. Screened containers stack like stone pyramids. Workers call out in multiple languages. A stray bolt from some ancient crate lies half-buried in rusted tarmac. You pick it up. It's cold and unremarkable, but real. Your heart pounds with history. You sense memory in every anchor chain, every semaphore signal. Trade is pressure. It doesn't stop. Once begun, routes don't vanish, they mutate. Vans pull cargo inland. Cargo ships dock. Ships sail. Containers unload. Customs process. Digital systems track every box. The chain extends. And under every railway line, under every port, under every highway, something hums, the echo of ancient footsteps. The beating of old paths transformed into steel and machine, yet still alive. You breathe in exhaust and salt and chance. You taste urgency and legacy. You feel like a pilgrim in a city built on trade. You step onto a rickety pier. Waves slap plastic cases and seaweed. A crane groans overhead. Container ID flickers on a screen. You walk forward. Because the road never ends. It only transforms. And the memory of every silk thread, salt block, amber gem, and spice pod still pulses beneath the steel.